The crack of ice sounded like a thunderclap across the frozen river, and Yates Vaughn dropped the firewood he had been gathering without a second thought when he saw the green hand break through the surface, grasping desperately at nothing but frigid air. He was running before his mind could catalog all the reasons this was a terrible idea. The river had frozen over 3 weeks ago, thick enough that the traders had been crossing it daily with their wagons, but the recent thaw had made the ice treacherous. Everyone in the settlement knew to stay off it. Everyone except, apparently, the orc girl now thrashing in water that would kill her in minutes. Yates did not slow down to remove his heavy winter boots or his thick wool coat. He did not stop to find a rope or call for help. He simply ran across the creaking ice, heard it groan beneath his weight, and launched himself into the jagged hole where she had fallen through. The cold hit him like a physical blow, driving the air from his lungs. His clothes immediately became leaden weights trying to drag him down. But his hand found fabric, then flesh, and he grabbed hold of the orc girl's arm with all the strength he possessed. She was still fighting, which was good because it meant she was conscious, but bad because her panic made her strong and unpredictable. "Stop fighting me," Yates gasped, his teeth already chattering so hard he could barely form words. "I am trying to help you," her eyes, wide and golden and terrified, fixed on him. For a moment, she went still, perhaps more shocked to see a human grabbing her than she had been at falling through the ice. Then the cold must have overwhelmed her shock because she grabbed onto him with desperate strength, her tusked face going beneath the water again. Yates kicked hard, trying to find the edge of the hole, but the ice shelf kept breaking away in his hands. The current beneath the frozen surface was stronger than he had anticipated, pulling at them both. His fingers were already going numb. If they did not get out in the next minute, they never would. "The edge," he managed to say, turning her bodily toward where he thought the ice looked thicker. "Kick, hard," she understood, even through her panic. Together they fought toward more solid ice, and when Yates threw his arm over the edge, it held. Barely. He could feel it bowing under their combined weight, but it did not break. With strength born of pure desperation, he shoved the orc girl upward, getting her torso onto the ice. "Crawl," he commanded, his lips so cold the word was barely intelligible. "Do not stand. Crawl." She pulled herself forward, her movements clumsy and weak, but she moved. Yates hauled himself out after her, his clothes frozen already, ice crystals forming in his hair. They could not stop here. The ice was still groaning, still threatening to give way and dump them both back into the killing cold. He grabbed her arm again and pulled her along, crawling on his belly across the ice, spreading his weight as widely as possible. She followed his lead, moving when he moved, stopping when he stopped. The 20 yards back to shore felt like 20 miles, but finally his hands touched frozen mud and dead grass instead of ice. Yates dragged himself onto the bank and immediately turned back to pull the orc girl the rest of the way out. She collapsed onto the frozen ground, her whole body shaking violently. She was younger than he had initially thought, perhaps 18 or 19, with braided black hair now plastered to her green skin. Her clothing was simple, a tunic and trousers that might have been brown before they became waterlogged, and she wore no coat despite the winter weather. "Can you walk?" Yates asked, but he was shaking too hard to wait for an answer. He grabbed her arm and hauled her upright, slinging her arm over his shoulders. "My cabin, not far, move," she tried. He could feel her legs moving, attempting to support her own weight, but she was failing fast. Hypothermia was setting in for both of them. Yates half-carried, half-dragged her through the sparse woods, following a path he knew by heart even though his vision was starting to blur at the edges. His cabin appeared through the trees, small and rough but blessedly solid. He kicked the door open and pulled the orc girl inside, letting the door slam shut behind them to keep out the wind. The fire had burned down to coals, but there was still heat radiating from the stone hearth. "Clothes off," Yates said, his frozen fingers fumbling with the buttons of his coat. "All of them. Now." The orc girl stared at him, her golden eyes still wide, still afraid, but now with a different kind of fear. "You will die if you keep wearing wet clothes," Yates said bluntly, fighting with his own boots. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely grip the laces. "I am not going to hurt you, but you need to get warm or we both die here." He turned his back to her and began stripping off his sodden clothing, laying each piece near the hearth where it could begin to dry. His entire body was shaking now, violent tremors that made his movements jerky and uncoordinated. He could hear her moving behind him, the wet slap of fabric hitting the floor. Yates wrapped himself in the thick wool blanket from his bed and added more wood to the fire, coaxing it back to life. Only when flames were crackling properly did he turn around. The orc girl had wrapped herself in his other blanket, clutching it around her body. Her green skin had taken on a grayish tinge, and she was shaking as badly as he was. "Come here," Yates said, positioning himself near the fire. "Sit." She moved slowly, suspicion and desperation warring on her face, but the cold won out over caution. She sat down near the fire, keeping the blanket wrapped tightly around herself. Her tusks, small and white, were visible as her jaw trembled with cold. They sat in silence for long minutes, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and their chattering teeth. Slowly, painfully, warmth began to seep back into Yates's extremities. The violent shaking eased to occasional tremors. Color returned to his fingers, though they burned and ached. "What were you doing out there?" Yates finally asked when he could form words properly again. The orc girl did not answer immediately. She stared into the fire, her expression closed off. When she finally spoke, her voice was rough and accented but clear. "Crossing. I did not know the ice was weak there." "Where were you going?" Again, that hesitation. "Away." Yates studied her in the firelight. Now that the immediate crisis had passed, he could see details he had missed before. Her clothing, though simple, had been well made before it got soaked. Her hands, though strong, were not heavily calloused. She wore a thin silver chain around her neck with some kind of pendant he could not quite see. This was not a raider or a warrior. This was someone who had left in a hurry, without proper preparation for winter travel. "You are running from something," Yates said. It was not a question, her jaw tightened, but she nodded once. "Yes. Anyone going to come looking for you? I hope not." Yates absorbed this. He should probably ask more questions. He should probably worry about the implications of harboring a runaway orc, because that was clearly what she was. But his body was exhausted, his mind was fuzzy from the cold, and honestly, he was just relieved they were both still alive. "What is your name?" he asked instead. She looked at him directly for the first time since they had sat down. Her eyes were striking, that bright golden color that seemed to glow in the firelight. "Griska. I am Yates." He pulled his blanket tighter around his shoulders. "You can stay here tonight. Tomorrow we will figure out what to do." Griska's eyes narrowed. "Why did you help me?" It was a fair question. Relations between humans and orcs on the frontier were tense at best, openly hostile at worst. Just last autumn, a raiding party had hit one of the outlying farms, stealing livestock and burning a barn. The settlers had retaliated by ambushing an orc hunting party. 3 dead on both sides, and the anger was still simmering. "Because you were drowning," Yates said simply. Did not really think about it beyond that. She studied him with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable, as if trying to determine whether he was lying. Finally, she looked back at the fire. "Thank you." The words were quiet, almost reluctant, but they were genuine. Yates nodded in acknowledgement and stood up carefully, his legs still unsteady. He checked their clothes by the fire, turning them so they would dry more evenly. The temperature outside had to be well below freezing, and night was falling fast. Even if Griska wanted to leave, she could not do so safely until morning. "Are you hungry?" Yates asked, moving toward his small pantry. "Yes." The admission sounded torn from her, as if accepting anything more from him was difficult. Yates pulled out bread, hard cheese, and dried venison. Simple fare, but filling. He cut portions and handed her half, then sat back down by the fire. They ate in silence, the food helping to restore some of their strength. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. It was going to be a cold night, colder than it had been in weeks. If Yates had not been out gathering firewood at exactly the right moment, if he had not looked toward the river at exactly the right time, Griska would be dead now, frozen beneath the ice. The thought sent an involuntary shiver through him that had nothing to do with temperature. "Where were you going?" Yates asked again, more gently this time, before the ice broke. Griska finished chewing a piece of bread before answering. "South. I heard there are settlements where humans and orcs trade peacefully, where the war has not reached. That is a long walk. Especially in winter. I know." Her voice was flat. "I did not have a choice." Yates wanted to ask what had driven her to run, but the closed expression on her face warned him off. Instead, he asked, "Do you have any other clothes, anything dry?" Griska shook her head. "I had a pack. It went into the river. I could not hold on to it." So she had nothing but what she was wearing, all of which was still soaking wet. Yates mentally inventoried his belongings. He had spare clothes, but they would be far too large for her. Still, too large was better than nothing. "I will find you something to wear," he said, standing up again. "It will not fit well, but it will be dry." He pulled out his spare shirt and trousers from the small chest at the foot of his bed. The shirt was heavy linen, warm and well worn. The trousers were wool, patched at the knees but serviceable. He handed them to Griska and turned his back again. "Thank you," she said again, and he heard the rustle of fabric as she changed beneath the blanket. When Yates turned around, he had to suppress a smile. The shirt hung on her like a dress, the shoulders drooping down her arms, and she had to roll the trousers several times at the waist to keep them up. But she was covered, and the dry fabric would keep her warm through the night. "You can have the bed," Yates said, gesturing to the narrow cot against the wall. "I will sleep by the fire." "No," Griska's voice was firm. "You pulled me from the river, you gave me food and clothes. I will not take your bed too. You are a guest. I am an orc who you found by chance. You have done enough." She settled herself by the hearth, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. "I sleep here." Yates recognized the stubborn set of her jaw. He had seen it on his mother often enough, that particular expression that meant no amount of arguing would change her mind. He sighed and retrieved a second blanket from the chest, handing it to her. "At least take this. The floor gets cold at night." She accepted it with a small nod, and Yates retreated to his bed. He lay down, still wrapped in his blanket, exhaustion pulling at him like an undertow. His body ached from the cold and the exertion, and his hands were starting to throb as feeling fully returned to them. "Yates," Griska's voice came softly from the darkness. "Yes. Why do you live out here alone? There is a settlement not far from here, yes. I saw smoke from chimneys before I tried to cross the river." Yates stared up at the rough wooden ceiling. It was a reasonable question. Most people did not choose to live in isolation on the frontier, not when there was safety in numbers. "I like the quiet," he said finally. "And the settlement folk do not much like me either, so it works out." "Why not?" "I did not fight when the war came." The words came out more bitter than he intended. My father and brother went to join the army when the orcs started raiding the eastern territories. I stayed behind to run the farm. Some people called it cowardice. He heard Griska shift, the blankets rustling. Was it? I do not know, Yates admitted. I thought someone needed to keep the farm running to make sure there was food. My mother was already sick. She needed care. But maybe I was just afraid. He had never said that out loud before, not to anyone. They both died anyway. Father and my brother in some battle I never learned the name of, and my mother from the fever 6 months later. I sold the farm and came out here, where no one knows me or cares what I did or did not do. Silence stretched between them. Yates wondered if he had said too much, revealed too much to this stranger who was, technically, supposed to be his enemy. My brother died in the war too, Griska said quietly. He was a warrior, proud and strong. He went to fight the human armies in the east. We got word last spring that he fell defending a village from raiders. She paused. Human raiders. Yates absorbed this. The war between their peoples had cost them both family, but on opposite sides of the same bloody conflict. It should have created an unbridgeable divide between them, but somehow, lying here in the darkness, it felt like the opposite. Like they were the only two people who could understand exactly what the other had lost. I am sorry, Yates said. I am sorry too. They said nothing more, and eventually, Yates felt himself drifting into sleep. His last thought was that he should probably be more worried about the consequences of sheltering Griska, but he was too tired to care. Morning came cold and bright, sunlight streaming through the gaps in the shutters. Yates woke to the smell of something cooking and sat up in confusion. Griska was kneeling by the hearth, tending a pan over the fire. She had put her own clothes back on, still damp in places but mostly dry, and had clearly been awake for some time. "What are you doing?" Yates asked, his voice rough with sleep. "Making breakfast," Griska said without turning around. "You had eggs and wild onions. I hope you do not mind." Yates climbed out of bed, his body stiff and sore. Every muscle seemed to ache, a reminder of yesterday's ordeal. He walked to the hearth and looked down at the pan. Griska had scrambled the eggs with the onions and was cooking them expertly, not too hot, stirring regularly to keep them from sticking. "Where did you learn to cook?" he asked. "My mother. She insisted all her children learn, boys and girls both." Griska scooped the eggs onto 2 wooden plates. She said anyone who could not feed themselves was a fool waiting to starve. They ate sitting by the fire again, the morning meal restoring more of Yates's strength. Outside, he could hear birds calling, the normal sounds of a winter morning. The world had not ended because he had pulled an orc girl from the river. Everything was continuing exactly as it had before. "I should go," Griska said, setting down her empty plate. "I have imposed on you enough." Yates looked at her, really looked at her. She was still pale beneath her green skin, moving carefully as if her body ached as much as his did. She had no pack, no supplies, no coat. If she walked out that door, she would be lucky to make it a day before the cold or hunger or wild animals got her. "Where will you go?" he asked. "South." "As I said, it is a 2-week walk to the next settlement, and that is if the weather holds and you do not run into any trouble. You have no food, no proper winter clothes, and no gear." Yates kept his voice level, stating facts rather than making accusations. "You will die before you make it 3 days. Griska's jaw tightened, that stubborn look returning. "That is not your concern. I did not pull you out of a frozen river just to watch you walk off and freeze to death in the woods." Yates stood up, crossing to the window to look out at the snow-covered landscape. "Stay, at least until you are stronger and I can put together some proper supplies for you." "Why would you do that?" Griska's voice was sharp with suspicion. "What do you want from me?" Yates turned back to face her. Nothing. I do not want anything from you, but I cannot send you out there to die. I just cannot. They stared at each other across the small cabin, wills clashing silently. Finally, Griska looked away. I do not have anything to trade, no way to repay you. Then do not repay me. Or repay me by staying alive. Yates moved back to the fire, feeding it more wood. You can stay in the cabin or outside in the woods, your choice. But either way, I am not giving you supplies until I am sure you are strong enough to use them. Griska was quiet for a long moment, weighing her options. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. 3 days. I will stay 3 days to recover my strength. Then I go with or without your supplies. It was not ideal, but it was better than watching her walk out immediately. Yates nodded. 3 days. The first day passed quietly. Griska stayed near the fire, clearly still recovering from the cold shock her body had endured. Yates went about his normal routine, checking his snares for rabbits, gathering more firewood, melting snow for water. He was aware of Griska watching him whenever he was in the cabin, her golden eyes tracking his movements with cautious attention. By the second day, she was moving around more, exploring the small space. It was not much to explore. The cabin was a single room with a hearth, a bed, a small table with 2 chairs, and shelves holding Yates's meager possessions. But Griska examined everything as if cataloging it, perhaps trying to understand the human who had saved her life. You have a lot of books, she observed, running her fingers along the spines of the small collection on one shelf. I like to read. Yates was carving new snare triggers from green wood, working by the firelight. There is not much else to do during the long winter nights. Can you read Orcish? Griska pulled one of the books down, opening it carefully. No. Can you read Common? She nodded, her eyes scanning the page. My mother taught me. She said knowledge was power, and refusing to learn the language of our enemies was just another form of weakness. Griska looked up from the book. This is about agriculture, crop rotation, and soil management. I was a farmer before I came here. Old habits. Yates shaved another curl of wood from the piece he was working on. I thought about trying to farm this land, but the growing season is too short this far north. Trapping and hunting are more reliable. Griska shelved the book and selected another. This one is poetry, my mother's. She loved poetry, used to read it aloud in the evenings. The memory brought a familiar ache to Yates's chest. I kept her favorites. He expected Griska to put it back, but instead she brought it to the fire and sat down, reading silently. Yates continued his work, the quiet scratch of his knife and the crackle of the fire the only sounds. It was peaceful in a way he had not experienced in a long time. Having another person in the cabin should have felt intrusive, but somehow it did not. This is beautiful, Griska said softly, her eyes still on the page. Listen to this. The stars care nothing for our wars, spinning eternal above the blood-soaked ground. They witnessed our first breath and will see our last, unchanged and unchanging, indifferent to our brief and furious existence. She looked up. Your mother had good taste. She did. Yates set aside the finished trigger. Read another if you want. Griska did, her voice smooth and surprisingly gentle as she read poem after poem. Some were about love, some about loss, some about the simple beauty of the natural world. Yates found himself stopping his work just to listen, drawn in by her reading. On the third day, Griska began insisting on helping with chores. Yates tried to refuse, but she was as stubborn as he had suspected, and eventually he gave in. She helped him haul water from the stream, chop wood, and check the snare line. She was strong, stronger than a human woman of her size would be, and she moved through the forest with surprising grace. You are good at this, Yates observed as she reset one of the snares with quick, efficient movements. Hunting, I mean. I should be. I spent half my childhood learning to track and trap. Griska secured the trigger and stepped back. My father was a hunter. He taught all of us how to survive in the wild. Yates caught the past tense. He died when I was 12, a bear, wounded and angry. Her voice was matter-of-fact, but Yates could hear the old pain beneath it. He managed to kill it before it killed him, but his wounds were too severe. He lived long enough to make it home, at least. We got to say goodbye. They moved to the next snare in silence. This one had caught a rabbit, and Yates dispatched it quickly and humanely before resetting the trap. By the time they returned to the cabin, the sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of orange and pink. Inside, Griska helped him prepare the rabbit for dinner, skinning and butchering it with practiced hands. They cooked it slowly over the fire with wild herbs Yates had dried in the fall, and the smell filled the small cabin with savory warmth. "This is good," Griska said as they ate. "You did not overcook it." "High praise," Yates said with a slight smile. She almost smiled back. "Almost. I have had a lot of overcooked rabbit in my life. This is much better." After dinner, as they sat by the fire, Yates brought up the subject he had been avoiding. "Tomorrow is the 4th day." Griska's expression shifted, becoming guarded again. "Yes. Are you still planning to leave?" I said 3 days. "I know what you said." Yates poked at the fire, sending up a shower of sparks, but it has been snowing on and off all day. The trails south are going to be difficult, maybe impassable in places. "I cannot stay here forever, Yates. I know that, but you could stay until spring. It is only 2 more months until thaw. By then the traveling would be much easier and safer." Griska shook her head. 2 months is too long. "People might come looking." "The people you are running from." She did not answer, which was answer enough. Yates tried a different approach. "What if you just stay until the weather clears? I will not ask you to stay forever, but at least give yourself a better chance of surviving the journey." "Why do you care so much?" The question was almost plaintive. "I am nothing to you. An orc, a stranger, probably a burden. You should want me gone." Yates considered his answer carefully. The truth was, he was not entirely sure why he cared. Maybe it was because she was the first real conversation he had had in months. Maybe it was because they had both lost family to the same stupid war. Maybe it was because, when she read poetry by the firelight, something in his chest ached in a way that was not entirely unpleasant. "I pulled you out of that river," he said finally. "That means something to me. I cannot explain it better than that. I just need to know you made it somewhere safe." Griska studied him with those intense golden eyes. "1 more week," she said at last. "I will stay 1 more week until the weather clears. Then I have to go." "Agreed." The week that followed established a rhythm that felt almost natural. They woke with the sun, made breakfast together, and then split the day's chores. Yates checked his trap lines while Griska handled water and firewood. In the afternoons, they worked on preparing supplies for her eventual journey, smoking meat and repairing gear. Yates found an old pack that had belonged to his father and gave it to Griska. It needed some stitching, but she repaired it competently. He also had a spare winter coat, too small for him but a decent fit for her. With a few adjustments, it would serve her well. The evenings were Yates's favorite part of the day. They would cook dinner together, eat by the fire, and then talk or read. Griska had worked her way through most of his small library, and they discussed the books like old friends debating philosophy. Sometimes they shared stories from their childhoods, carefully avoiding topics that touched too directly on the war or the tensions between their peoples. "I always wanted to see the ocean," Griska said one night, gazing into the fire. "My brother told me about it once. He had traveled to the coast when he was young. He said the water went on forever, bigger than any lake or river, and it tasted of salt. I have never seen it either, Yates admitted. My father promised to take us once after the harvest was good enough that we could afford the journey. But then the war started and there was never time. Do you think it is as beautiful as they say? I hope so. It would be disappointing otherwise. Griska laughed, a real laugh, and Yates realized it was the first time he had heard the sound. It was surprisingly musical, warm, and genuine. He found himself wanting to hear it again. What about you? Griska asked. What did you want to see before everything changed? Yates thought about it. The great library in the capital. They say it has books from every corner of the world, thousands of them, covering every subject imaginable. I used to dream about spending days there, just reading and learning. Why did you not go? Same reason most dreams do not come true. Life got in the way. He shrugged. The farm needed work, my mother got sick, the war came. There was always something more important than what I wanted. That is sad, Griska said quietly. Maybe, but I think most people's lives are like that. We do what we have to do, not what we want to do. Is that why you live out here alone? Because you have to? No, Yates said honestly. This I chose. After everything fell apart, I could have stayed in the village, found work, made a life there. But I was tired of people looking at me with either pity or scorn. Out here, there is no one to judge me, no one to remind me of what I lost or what I failed to do. Griska was quiet for a moment. I understand that, she said finally. The wanting to escape, I mean. It was the closest she had come to explaining why she was running, and Yates did not push for more. If she wanted to tell him, she would. The weather did not clear. If anything, it got worse. A storm blew in on the 5th day, heavy snow and howling winds that made it dangerous to go more than a few yards from the cabin. They were trapped inside together, but it did not feel like being trapped. They played cards with a worn deck Yates had, taught each other games from their respective childhoods, and cooked increasingly elaborate meals just to pass the time. How do you make bread without an oven? Griska asked, watching Yates mix flour and water in a wooden bowl. You make flatbread instead. Cook it right on a hot stone by the fire. He kneaded the dough, working it until it was smooth and elastic. My mother taught me. She said a man who could not bake his own bread was too dependent on others. She and my mother would have gotten along, Griska said with a slight smile. They had similar philosophies about self-sufficiency. They cooked the flatbread together, laughing when the first one burned and celebrating when the second came out perfect. They ate it hot with honey, sitting close to the fire as the wind rattled the shutters. Yates, Griska said, licking honey from her fingers, can I ask you something? Of course. Why are you not afraid of me? Most humans see an orc and reach for a weapon. You just reached for a drowning girl. Yates considered the question. I suppose I am not afraid because you have not given me a reason to be. You have been nothing but respectful and helpful since you have been here. Why would I fear that? Because of what I am. Because of the war. The war is something our leaders started, not us. You did not kill my father and brother. I did not kill yours. We are just two people trying to survive, same as everyone else. He met her eyes. Should I be afraid of you? No, Griska said firmly. I would never hurt you. You saved my life. Then we are in agreement. No fear, no violence. Just two people sharing a cabin during a storm. But even as he said it, Yates knew it was not entirely true. There was something building between them, something that went beyond simple gratitude or companionship. He felt it when their hands accidentally touched reaching for the same bowl. He felt it when he caught her watching him with an expression he could not quite name. He felt it in the way his chest tightened when she smiled. It was dangerous, whatever this was. Nothing could come of it. She was leaving as soon as the weather cleared, heading south to a new life. He was staying here in his self-imposed isolation. They were from different peoples, different worlds. Getting attached would only lead to pain, but knowing that did not stop his heart from beating faster when she was near. The storm lasted 3 days. When it finally cleared, the world outside was buried under 2 feet of fresh snow. The trails would be impassable for at least a week, maybe longer. Griska did not even suggest leaving. They both knew it would be suicide to try. "I am sorry," Yates said as they surveyed the snow-covered landscape from the cabin door. "I know you need to keep moving. It is not your fault that it snowed." Griska's breath plumed white in the cold air. "Nature does not care about my plans." They spent the next few days digging out, clearing paths to the woodpile and the stream, checking that the weight of the snow had not damaged the cabin's roof. It was hard work, but Griska attacked it with the same determined efficiency she brought to everything else. On the 3rd day after the storm, Yates was splitting wood when he heard a shout from inside the cabin. He dropped the axe and ran inside, expecting to find Griska hurt or in trouble. Instead, he found her standing in the middle of the room, holding one of his books open, her expression stricken. "What is wrong?" Yates asked, looking around for the source of her distress. Griska held up the book. It was a journal, one Yates had not looked at in years. His mother's journal filled with her thoughts and observations and poetry. "I am sorry," Griska said quickly. "I did not mean to pry. I thought it was just another book. I did not realize it was personal until I started reading." "It is all right," Yates said, though his heart was pounding. "What did you read?" "Just the first few pages. About the garden she was planning and missing your father when he was away." Griska carefully closed the journal. "She wrote beautifully, like the poetry she loved." Yates took the journal, his hands trembling slightly. He had not opened it since his mother died, too afraid of the pain those familiar words would bring. But standing here now, with Griska looking at him with such understanding in her eyes, the fear seemed smaller. "She did," he said softly. "She found beauty in everything, even the hard times. Even when she was dying, she would describe the sunlight through the window like it was the most precious thing in the world." "That is a gift," Griska said, "to see beauty even in darkness." "Yes." Yates turned the journal over in his hands. "I have not been able to read this since she died. It hurt too much." "Then I am sorry I opened that pain for you." "No, do not be sorry." He looked up at Griska. "Maybe it is time. Maybe avoiding the pain is not the same as healing from it." That night, Yates opened his mother's journal and read aloud by the firelight while Griska listened. He read about the farm, about his father's terrible jokes, about her worries for her sons. He read about her garden that never grew quite as she planned, about the neighbors who brought soup when she got sick, about her quiet pride in her family. And he cried for the first time since she had died, because the words were so her and she was so gone. Griska did not say anything. She just moved closer, her shoulder pressing against his in silent support, and that simple contact was more comforting than any words could have been. When he finally finished reading and closed the journal, Yates felt lighter than he had in years. The grief was still there, would probably always be there, but it no longer felt like a weight trying to drown him. "Thank you," he said to Griska, "for listening. Thank you for sharing it with me." She was still sitting close, and Yates was acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched. "Your mother sounded like a remarkable woman." "She was." He set the journal aside carefully. "What about your mother? Is she still alive?" Griska's expression clouded. "Yes. At least she was when I left." "Does she know where you are?" "No. No one knows where I am. That is the point." It was the most direct reference Griska had made to her circumstances since that first night. Yates sensed that if he pushed now, she might finally tell him the whole story. But he also sensed that it would cost her something to do it, and he was not sure he had the right to demand that price. "You do not have to tell me," Yates said, "but if you want to, I will listen." Griska stared into the fire for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was low. I was supposed to get married. An arrangement between my family and another clan meant to strengthen alliances and secure territory. The male was older, a respected warrior, and it was considered a good match. You did not want to marry him. I did not even know him. We had met twice, both times in formal settings where we barely spoke. But my mother said it was my duty to the family, to the clan, that my feelings did not matter compared to the security this alliance would bring. Yates could hear the bitterness in her voice. So you ran. 2 days before the wedding, yes. I took what I could carry and left in the night. I knew if I stayed, I would spend the rest of my life bound to a stranger, bearing his children, managing his household. I would be a piece traded for political advantage, not a person. She looked at Yates. Maybe that makes me selfish. Maybe I should have done my duty, but I could not. I just could not. That does not make you selfish, Yates said firmly. That makes you human. He paused. You know what I mean. Griska almost smiled. I know what you mean. Will they come after you, your family? My mother might send warriors to bring me back, or she might disown me and tell the other clan I am dead. I do not know which would be worse. Griska pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. Either way, I can never go home. I chose freedom, and it cost me everything else. Yates understood that feeling. He had made a similar choice when he left the village, trading community for isolation, judgment for peace. But at least he had not lost his family to his choice. Griska had sacrificed far more than he had. For what it is worth, Yates said, I think you were brave. It takes courage to choose your own path, especially when everyone else is telling you to take a different one. Or it takes cowardice, Griska countered. I ran away from my responsibilities. You ran toward freedom. That is not the same thing. They sat in silence, shoulders still touching, and Yates felt something shift between them. This was no longer just a stranger he had rescued from the river. This was someone he understood, someone whose pain and choices resonated with his own. This was someone he cared about perhaps more than he should. Griska, he said softly, what if you did not go south? What if you stayed here? She turned to look at him, her golden eyes wide. Stayed here? Why not? You said yourself that anyone looking for you would not think to search this far north. You would be safe here. We could, he stopped, not sure how to finish that sentence. We could what? Griska's voice was barely above a whisper. I do not know, Yates admitted. But I know I do not want you to leave. I know that the past few weeks having you here have been the happiest I have been in years. I know that when I think about you walking away, heading south alone, it makes me feel like I am drowning all over again. Yates. His name on her lips sounded like a prayer. You barely know me. I know you well enough. I know you are kind and strong and stubborn. I know you read poetry like it matters and cook eggs better than anyone I have ever met. I know that you laugh at my terrible jokes and you are not afraid of hard work. I know that when you smile, really smile, it makes me want to find ways to make you smile again. Griska was staring at him now, something fierce and fragile in her expression. This is insane. We are from different peoples. There are laws against this in most settlements. We would be outcasts, both of us. I am already an outcast, Yates said, and you are running from your own people anyway. What do we have to lose? Everything? Nothing. Griska shook her head, but she did not pull away. I do not know. Then stay and find out. Stay until you are sure one way or the other. For a long moment, Griska did not respond. Then, slowly, she reached out and took Yates's hand, her green fingers intertwining with his. Her skin was warm, her grip strong. I will stay, she said. For now, I will stay. The winter deepened, but inside the cabin, something new was growing. Yates and Griska did not speak again about what had been said that night by the fire. but the words hung between them, changing everything and nothing at all. They still split chores and cooked together and read by the firelight. But now there were small touches that lingered, hands brushing when they passed each other in the small space. There were long looks that carried unspoken questions and answers. There was a new awareness, a tension that was not uncomfortable but was definitely present. Yates found himself watching Griska when she did not know he was looking, memorizing the way she moved, the expressions that crossed her face. He noticed things he had not let himself notice before, like the way her tusks gave her smile a unique character, or how her pointed ears twitched slightly when she was concentrating. He noticed that her hands, though calloused from work, were elegant in their movements. He noticed that she hummed sometimes while she cooked, wordless melodies that he had never heard before, but found himself learning anyway. And he was aware, always aware, that she was watching him too. He could feel her eyes on him when he split wood or mended his traps. He caught her studying his face when she thought he was absorbed in a book. Once, he woke in the middle of the night and saw her silhouette by the window, looking out at the moonlit snow, and the loneliness in her posture made his heart ache. A month passed, then 6 weeks. The snow began to recede slightly as the worst of winter loosened its grip. Soon, the trails would be passable again. Soon, Griska would have no excuse to stay. Neither of them mentioned it. Instead, they fell into a routine that felt less like two people sharing a space and more like two lives intertwining. Griska took over most of the cooking because she was better at it, and Yates did not mind. Yates handled repairs and maintenance because he had the tools and knowledge. They checked the trap lines together now, walking through the forest in comfortable silence or easy conversation. One afternoon, Griska spotted deer tracks and insisted on following them. Yates grabbed his bow and went along, more to spend time with her than because they needed the meat. They tracked the deer for over an hour, moving quietly through the snow, until Griska held up a hand and pointed. There, in a small clearing, stood a doe and her yearling. They were beautiful in the winter sunlight, their breath steaming in the cold air. Yates raised his bow, drawing the string back slowly, carefully. It was an easy shot. They would eat well for weeks. But then he felt Griska's hand on his arm, gently pushing the bow down. He looked at her questioningly. "Let them go," she whispered. "We have enough food, let them live." Yates lowered his bow and they watched together as the deer grazed, unaware of how close they had come to death. When the animals finally moved on, disappearing into the trees, Griska turned to Yates with a smile that made the missed shot worth it. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For listening, for understanding." She looked back toward where the deer had been. "In my clan, showing mercy to prey is considered weakness, but I always thought there was strength in choosing not to kill when you could." "I agree," Yates said. "Taking a life should mean something, even if it is just a deer. Killing when you do not need to feels wrong." They walked back to the cabin hand in hand, and Yates thought that this, right here, was what happiness felt like. Not grand gestures or dramatic moments, but simple shared understanding. Walking through the snow with someone who saw the world the same way he did. That night, as they prepared dinner, Griska started humming again. Yates had learned to recognize some of the melodies by now, old Orc songs she had learned as a child. This one was new, though, softer and sweeter than the others. "What is that song?" he asked. Griska blushed, her green skin darkening. "Just something my mother used to sing. It is about spring returning after a long winter. Sing the words." She hesitated, then began to sing softly in her own language. Yates did not understand the words, but the melody was beautiful, hopeful, and melancholy at once. When she finished, the cabin seemed too quiet. "That was beautiful," Yates said. "My mother had a better voice." I cannot reach the high notes like she could. I think your voice is perfect. Griska looked at him, and something in her expression made Yates's breath catch. They were standing very close, the small cabin forcing proximity, but this felt different. Intentional. Yates, Griska said, her voice barely audible. I need to tell you something. What? I do not want to leave. I know I said I was just staying until the weather cleared, but the truth is I do not want to go. I do not want to go south or anywhere else. I want to stay here with you. Yates felt his heart hammering against his ribs. Then stay. It is not that simple. People will find out eventually. Traders come through in the spring and summer. They will see me and word will spread. There will be consequences. Let there be consequences, Yates said. I do not care what people think. You might when they show up with torches and pitchforks, demanding to know why you are harboring an orc. Then we will deal with it together. He reached out and cupped her face in his hands, feeling the warmth of her skin, the slight roughness of old scars. Griska, I have been alone for so long. I forgot what it was like to want to wake up in the morning to look forward to something besides just surviving another day. You gave that back to me. I am not letting you go without a fight. Tears were forming in Griska's golden eyes. I feel the same way. Being here with you, it is the first time I have felt safe since I ran from home. The first time I felt like I could be myself instead of what everyone expected me to be. I do not want to lose that. Then do not, Yates said, and he leaned forward and kissed her. For a moment, Griska froze, surprised. Then she was kissing him back, her arms coming up to wrap around his neck, and Yates felt like he was falling and flying at the same time. Her tusks made the angle slightly different from kissing a human woman, but it did not matter. Nothing mattered except the fact that she was here in his arms, kissing him like he was air and she had been drowning. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Griska was crying for real now. I love you, she said. I know it is too fast and probably insane, but I do. I love you. I love you too, Yates said. And saying it out loud felt like jumping into that frozen river again. Terrifying and necessary and absolutely right. They held each other by the firelight as their dinner burned forgotten in the pan, and Yates thought that he would gladly face down any consequence, any judgment, any threat, as long as Griska was by his side. Spring came slowly to the northern frontier, but it came. The snow melted in patches, revealing brown grass and the first brave green shoots of new growth. The stream swelled with snowmelt, running fast and cold. Birds returned, filling the forest with song. And with the thaw came the first traders, traveling the routes that had been impassable all winter. Yates and Griska saw the first wagon from a distance and had to make a quick decision. They could hide Griska, pretend Yates still lived alone and avoid the confrontation. Or they could face it head-on and deal with whatever came. They chose confrontation. The trader was an older man named Morris who had been running this route for 20 years. He knew Yates by sight, had sold him supplies in the past. When his wagon rolled up to the cabin and he saw Griska standing next to Yates, his eyes went wide with shock. Yates Vaughn, Morris said slowly, his hand moving subtly toward the knife at his belt. Want to explain why there is an orc at your cabin? Her name is Griska, Yates said calmly. She is my wife. It was not technically true, not yet, but they had discussed it and decided that claiming marriage would be more acceptable than admitting they were simply living together. Morris stared at them like they had both grown second heads. Your wife, he repeated. You married an orc. I did. Yates kept his voice steady, non-threatening. Is that going to be a problem? Morris looked between them, clearly trying to decide how to respond. Finally, he sighed and climbed down from his wagon. Not my business who you marry, son, but you know people are going to talk. The settlement folk are going to have opinions. Let them, Griska said, speaking for the first time. We are not hurting anyone. Morris studied her with the same careful assessment he had given Yates. You speak calm and well. I was taught by my mother. And you are really married to this fool, despite the tension, Griska smiled. I really am. Morris shook his head, but there was a hint of amusement in his expression. Well then, I suppose congratulations are in order, though you have picked a hell of a hard road for yourselves. He gestured to his wagon. I am guessing you need supplies. I have flour, salt, dried beans. Some new tools just came in from the east. The transaction was surreal. They conducted it as if this were a perfectly normal visit, Morris showing his wares, Griska and Yates selecting what they needed. Yates paid in furs from his winter trapping, and Morris accepted them without comment. But when they were done and Morris was loading his wagon to leave, he paused. Fair warning, he said. Word of this is going to spread. You might get visitors, and not all of them are going to be as accepting as I am. Watch yourselves. We will, Yates promised. They watched Morris's wagon roll away, and Griska leaned against Yates. That went better than I expected. Morris is a good man, but he is right. Others will come, and they will not all be so understanding. Then we will face them together. Over the next few weeks, they did indeed get visitors. Some were curious, coming just to see if the rumors were true. Others came with poorly concealed hostility, warning Yates that he was betraying his own kind. A few came from the settlement to tell him he was no longer welcome there, though Yates had not visited in over a year anyway. Through it all, Yates and Griska presented a united front. They were polite but firm. They were not hiding, not apologizing, not explaining themselves beyond the simple truth. They loved each other and had chosen to build a life together. Most people eventually left them alone. A few became openly hostile, and Yates had to run off one group of young men who showed up drunk and looking for trouble. But as spring turned to summer, the visits became less frequent. People grew bored with the scandal and found other things to gossip about. One day in late spring, an unexpected visitor arrived. She was an older orc woman, tall and powerfully built, with graying hair and the bearing of someone used to authority. Griska saw her coming from a distance and went pale. My mother, she whispered. Yates, that is my mother. They stood together as the woman approached, and Yates could feel Griska trembling. He took her hand, squeezing it reassuringly. Griska's mother stopped a few yards away, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, she just looked at her daughter, and Griska looked back, neither speaking. So, the older woman finally said, You are alive. I am alive, Griska confirmed. When you disappeared, I thought you dead. We searched for weeks. Then word reached me that a human was living with an orc woman in the northern woods. I knew it had to be you. Her eyes shifted to Yates. You are the human. My name is Yates Vaughn, madam, and my daughter is really your wife, she is. Griska's mother looked back at her daughter. Is this truly what you want? This life with him cut off from your people? Yes, Griska said without hesitation. Mother, I am sorry I ran. I am sorry I caused you pain, but I could not marry someone I did not love. I could not live a life that was not mine to choose. And you love this human, I do, more than I thought possible. The older woman sighed deeply. You always were stubborn. Even as a child, once you set your mind on something, there was no changing it. She looked at Yates again. If you hurt her, I will come back and kill you slowly. Understand? Understood, Yates said, but I will not hurt her. I would die first. See that you remember that. Griska's mother turned back to her daughter. The clan considers you dead. I told them you fell in the river and drowned. It seemed kinder than the truth, and it allowed me to avoid dishonoring the alliance with your intended's family. Thank you, Griska said quietly. Do not thank me. You broke my heart when you left. But the older woman's voice cracked slightly. "I am glad you are alive, though. I am glad you found something worth running toward instead of just running away." She reached into the pack she carried and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "These were your grandmother's. I want you to have them." Griska unwrapped the bundle to reveal a set of intricate silver bracelets, clearly very old and very valuable. Tears streamed down her face. "Mother, I cannot. You can and you will. Every woman in our family has worn them on her wedding day. I do not care if you married a human in some strange ceremony I was not invited to. You are still my daughter, and you will have your grandmother's bracelets." Griska threw her arms around her mother, sobbing, and the older woman held her tightly, murmuring something in their own language that Yates could not understand. When they finally separated, both had tears on their faces. "I cannot visit again," Griska's mother said. "It would raise too many questions, but know that I wish you well, both of you." She turned and walked away back into the forest, and Griska watched until she disappeared from view. Then she looked down at the bracelets in her hands and smiled through her tears. "She gave us her blessing," Griska said wonderingly. "I never thought she would." "She loves you," Yates said. "Of course she wants you to be happy." That night they held a private ceremony of their own. There was no priest, no formal vows written down. Just the two of them by the fire, exchanging promises they had written themselves. Yates promised to stand by Griska through whatever came, to honor her choices, to build a life with her that would be theirs alone. Griska promised the same, her voice steady and sure. She wore her grandmother's bracelets, and Yates placed a simple ring on her finger that he had carved from wood and polished until it shone. It was not silver or gold, but Griska looked at it like it was the most precious thing in the world. "I love you," she said. "I love you too," Yates replied, and he kissed his wife as the fire crackled and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Summer brought hard work but also joy. Yates and Griska expanded the cabin, adding a second room and a covered porch. They planted a small garden, and under Griska's careful tending, it flourished. They worked the trap lines together and sold furs to Morris when he came through on his routes. They were building something real, something lasting. Word continued to spread about them, and occasionally they would encounter hostility. Once, a group of orc warriors came through, hunting humans who had raided one of their villages. They saw Griska and demanded to know why she was living with a human. She faced them down with a fierceness Yates had not seen before, telling them in no uncertain terms that her life was her own to choose, and they could take their judgment elsewhere. The warriors left, but not without dire warnings about what happened to orcs who betrayed their kind. Griska was quiet for days afterward, and Yates knew she was wrestling with guilt and doubt. But she never spoke of leaving, never suggested that they had made a mistake. In the fall, Griska realized she was pregnant. They had not planned it, but they had not prevented it either, and when she told Yates, his joy was immediate and overwhelming. A child. They were going to have a child. "Are you sure you want this?" Griska asked, her hand on her still flat stomach. "A child that is half orc, half human. The world will not be kind to them." "The world was not kind to either of us," Yates said, pulling her close. "But we survived and we found each other. Our child will do the same, and they will have something we did not have for a long time. They will have parents who love them completely and without reservation." Griska cried, but they were happy tears, and Yates held her and thought about the future they were creating. It would not be easy. Their child would face prejudice from both humans and orcs. They would be too orc for some, too human for others. But they would be loved, and they would be taught to be strong and kind and true to themselves. That was all any parent could really offer. Winter came again, their second together, and Griska's pregnancy advanced. She remained healthy and strong, though Yates worried constantly. When she teased him about his excessive concern, he reminded her that he had pulled her from a frozen river and he was not about to lose her now. "You are not going to lose me," Griska said, laughing. "I am tougher than you think." "I know exactly how tough you are," Yates replied. "That does not stop me from worrying." In the depths of winter, when the snow lay thick on the ground and the nights were long and cold, Griska went into labor. Yates had prepared as best he could, boiling water and gathering clean cloths, but nothing could really prepare him for the reality of it. Griska labored for hours, and Yates felt more helpless than he ever had in his life. But Griska was strong. She breathed through the pain, gripped his hand hard enough to bruise, and brought their child into the world with a final, triumphant cry. Yates cut the cord with shaking hands and wrapped the baby in the softest blanket they owned. "A girl," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "We have a daughter." Griska held out her arms and Yates placed the baby in them. Their daughter had green-tinged skin, not as dark as Griska's but definitely not human pale. She had small, barely visible tusks and the barest points to her ears. She was perfect. "What should we name her?" Griska asked, gazing down at the tiny face. They had discussed names during the pregnancy but never settled on one. Now, looking at his daughter, Yates knew exactly what her name should be. "Hope," he said. "We should name her Hope." Griska looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "Hope." "Yes, that is perfect." They spent that winter wrapped in the glow of new parenthood, exhausted and overwhelmed and happier than they had ever been. Hope was a good baby, healthy and strong, with lungs that could wake the dead when she wanted to be fed. They took turns walking her through the cabin at night, singing lullabies in both common and Orcish. Yates found himself singing the spring song Griska had taught him, the one about winter ending and new growth beginning. It seemed appropriate. They had survived their own long winter, and now spring was here in the form of this tiny, perfect child. When spring truly came and Morris made his first run of the season, he brought gifts for the baby. Soft blankets and tiny clothes, and a carved wooden rattle that Hope immediately tried to eat. "So you really did it," Morris said, looking at Hope with a mixture of wonder and concern. "You brought a half-breed child into this world." "We brought our daughter into the world," Yates corrected firmly. "And yes, we really did it." Morris shook his head, but he was smiling. "You are either the bravest people I have ever met or the most foolish. Maybe both." "Definitely both," Griska said with a laugh. Over the months that followed, more people came to see the baby. Some came out of curiosity, some out of kindness. A few human women from the settlement brought food and supplies, their initial prejudice overcome by the universal pull of a new baby. A couple of orc traders stopped by, drawn by rumors of a half-breed child, and left gifts of their own. Not everyone was accepting. There were still those who spat at the sight of them, who called Hope an abomination and predicted doom for them all. But there were also those who simply saw a family trying to make their way in the world, and they offered support in whatever small ways they could. Hope grew quickly, meeting every milestone with enthusiasm. She crawled early, walked early, and talked early, jabbering away in a mix of common and Orcish that made perfect sense to her even if no one else could understand her. She had Yates's curiosity and Griska's determination, a combination that kept them constantly on their toes. On Hope's first birthday, they held a small celebration, just the three of them. They made a special meal and Griska baked a cake using honey from wild bees. Hope made a mess of it, getting more on her face than in her mouth, and laughed the entire time. That night, after Hope was asleep, Yates and Griska sat on their porch and watched the stars. "You ever regret it?" Yates asked. "Choosing this life?" Griska looked at him in surprise. "Never." Not for a single moment. Why would I? Because it is hard, because people judge us, because Hope will have to face that judgment her entire life. And she will face it with strength because she comes from strength. Griska took his hand. Yates, you saved my life when you pulled me from that river, but you did more than that. You gave me a life worth living. You gave me love and respect and a future I chose for myself. How could I ever regret that? I just want you to be happy. I am happy. Ridiculously, impossibly happy. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Are you? More than I ever thought possible, Yates admitted. Sometimes I still cannot believe this is real, that you are here, that we have hope, that we built all of this together. Believe it, Griska said softly. Because it is real, and it is ours, and nothing can take it away from us. Years passed. Hope grew from a toddler to a child, curious and bright and occasionally too brave for her own good. She learned to read from both her parents, devouring every book in the cabin and begging for more whenever Morris came through. She learned to hunt and trap from Yates, to cook and sew from Griska. She learned songs in Orcish and poetry in Common. She also learned that the world could be cruel. The first time another child called her a monster, she came home crying, and Yates and Griska had to explain that some people would never see past what she was to who she was. It broke their hearts, but it was a lesson she needed to learn. You are not a monster, Griska told her daughter fiercely. You are a beautiful, strong, brilliant girl who happens to be half orc and half human. That makes you special, not wrong. But they hate me, Hope sobbed. Some do, Yates said, pulling her into his lap. Some people are so full of fear and anger that they cannot see past it. But many others do not hate you. Morris does not hate you. The women who bring us food do not hate you. And your mother and I love you more than anything in this world. It still hurts, Hope said. I know, sweetheart. It still hurts your mother and me too sometimes. But we do not let that hurt make us smaller or meaner. We let it make us stronger and kinder, because we know how much words can wound, and we choose not to wound others. Hope eventually dried her tears and went back out into the world with her head held high. It was not the last time she came home hurt by others' cruelty, but each time she bounced back a little faster, grew a little stronger, learned to care a little less about the opinions of those who did not matter. When Hope was 7, Griska's mother visited again, aging but still formidable. She met her granddaughter for the first time and was clearly delighted by her, teaching her orc songs and telling her stories about her ancestors. Before she left, she pulled Griska aside. You chose well, she said. That human of yours loves you truly, and he is a good father. I am proud of you, daughter. It was the last time they saw her. Word came the following spring that she had died peacefully in her sleep. Griska grieved, but she also celebrated, teaching Hope the proper orc death songs and telling her all about the grandmother who had been fierce and loving in equal measure. More years passed. Hope became a teenager, tall and strong like her mother, with her father's thoughtfulness and love of books. She talked about traveling south, seeing the ocean, maybe finding the great library Yates had once dreamed of visiting. You should go, Yates told her. See the world, find your own path. But what about you and Mother? Hope asked. We will be fine. We will be here when you want to come home, and we will support you wherever you go. Hope did eventually leave, setting out on her own journey when she turned 18. It was hard watching her go, harder than Yates had anticipated. But he and Griska stood together and waved as she disappeared into the forest, heading south toward whatever future awaited her. She will be fine, Griska said, though her voice wavered. I know. She is her mother's daughter. She can handle anything. They returned to the cabin that had been their home for nearly 2 decades now, and Yates looked around at everything they had built. The shelves full of books, the garden now fully established, the additions they had made over the years. This place had been a refuge when he first came here, a place to hide from a world that had hurt him, but it had become so much more. It had become a home, filled with love and laughter and all the messy, complicated beauty of a life shared with someone who understood him completely. "What do you want to do now?" Griska asked, sliding her arms around his waist. "Now, I want to grow old with you. I want to tend our garden and read our books and wait for Hope to visit with stories of her adventures. I want to wake up every morning grateful that I was in the right place at the right time to save a drowning orc girl." Griska smiled, that full, genuine smile that still made his heart race even after all these years. "You know, I never thanked you properly for that." "For what?" "For jumping in before you even took off your boots. For not hesitating, not calculating the risk, just acting. For being the kind of person who saves someone even when everyone says they should not be saved." Yates pulled her closer. "I would do it again in a heartbeat, every time, in every life." "I know. That is why I love you." They kissed there in the doorway of their home, the same way they had kissed 1,000 times before and would kiss 1,000 times again. Outside, spring was in full bloom, the world green and alive and full of possibility. Inside, the fire crackled on the hearth, warming the space they had made together. It had not been an easy road. There had been judgment and hardship and moments when the weight of other people's hatred felt too heavy to bear. But they had borne it together, and in doing so, they had built something that no amount of prejudice could destroy. A life. A family. A love that transcended the artificial boundaries between their peoples. Years later, when Hope returned with her own partner and stories of acceptance and friendship she had found in the southern settlements, Yates and Griska listened with joy. The world was changing, slowly but surely. People were learning that love did not recognize borders or species, that family was built not by blood alone but by choice and commitment. They were not the only human orc couple anymore. Others had followed their example, brave souls who chose love over fear. The settlements were learning to adapt, to make room for those who did not fit neatly into one category or another. It was not perfect. It never would be perfect. But it was better. And on the nights when Yates and Griska sat on their porch, watching the stars and holding hands, they knew they had been part of that change. They had refused to let the world tell them what was possible, and in doing so, they had made the impossible real. Yates thought back sometimes to that moment when he had seen a green hand break through the ice. He had acted on pure instinct, not thinking about consequences or complications. If he had hesitated even a moment, Griska would have died, and none of this would exist. No love, no hope, no home built from determination and defiance. "Thank you," he said one night, speaking into the comfortable silence. "For what?" Griska asked. "For being worth saving, for choosing to stay, for building this life with me." Griska squeezed his hand. "Thank you for jumping in with your boots on." They laughed together, the sound carrying across the clearing and into the forest beyond. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. The stream burbled over stones, running free and clear now that spring had fully melted the ice. The world turned on as it always had, indifferent to the small dramas of mortal lives. But in their little corner of that vast, indifferent world, Yates and Griska had carved out something precious. They had taken broken pieces, a runaway orc girl, a lonely human man, and built something whole and beautiful and true. And when they finally grew too old to manage the homestead alone, when Hope came to take them south to live with her and her growing family, they left the cabin standing. It remained there in the forest, a monument to what was possible when two people chose love over fear, connection over isolation, hope over despair. Other couples would find it over the years, those who needed a safe place to begin their own impossible journeys. The cabin would shelter them as it had sheltered Yates and Griska, and in that shelter, new stories would begin. But none of them would quite match the story of the orc girl who fell through the ice and the human man who jumped in to save her, boots and all, without a moment's hesitation. That story would be passed down through generations, told around fires and whispered to children. A reminder that sometimes the most important decisions are the ones we make without thinking, guided only by the heart's insistence that some lives are worth any risk to save. Yates Vaughn died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73, surrounded by his family. Griska held his hand as he slipped away, and she told him all the things she had told him 1,000 times before, that she loved him, that he had given her everything, that she would see him again someday, on whatever shore waited beyond this life. She lived another 5 years after he died, spending them with Hope and the grandchildren, teaching them the old songs and the old stories. When her time came, she was ready, eager to see Yates again and tell him about everything he had missed. They buried her next to him in a small plot near the cabin, under a tree they had planted together decades before. The headstones were simple, carved with their names and the years they had lived. But Hope added one more inscription, words that captured the essence of their story. He jumped in. She stayed. Together they built a life worth living. And in the years that followed, people would visit those graves and remember. They would remember that love was stronger than hate, that courage was sometimes found in the simplest actions, that families could be built from the most unlikely foundations. They would remember Yates and Griska, the human and the orc who should never have met, should never have loved, should never have succeeded in building a life together. But they had. And in doing so, they had changed their small corner of the world forever, proving that sometimes the most impossible love stories are the ones that need to be told the most, because they remind us all of what is possible when we choose to jump in, boots and all, and save someone who needs saving. Even if that someone is supposed to be our enemy, especially then.